Isn't that illegal?
How likely is it that there is a God watching everything, absolutely everything in the universe? Every particle, every single part of space. Every single galaxy, with billions of stars in each galaxy, is watching everything. Because apparently God is watching the whole of the universe, everything. And yet, He's also able to individually read everyone's mind simultaneously and record their every action. And if you think about it, it must take some doing. Because God is all-knowing, He must know the future. But that means that He knows what everything has done, what everything is doing, what everything will do for every single second of the universe's existence. He must know everything. To do that, He's going to need to store or have made a copy of every particle that there exists in the universe and store that record somewhere. And he's got to store it again and again, one copy of the entire universe for every second of time, past, present or future, until the end of time. How likely is that? I'm going to juggle some numbers for you, and obviously some of these numbers are going to be the best estimates from science, but the size of the results is going to reveal that even if we're wrong by several orders of magnitude, there's still going to be some pretty mind-boggling figures coming out of these calculations. So let's take one exact copy of the universe per second. We're going to give God quite an impressive compression algorithm. Let's allow Him to store everything, every single piece of information in the universe in a millionth of its original size. So every million seconds God's creating a million new universes, or a copy of a million universes, and He fits them into the space needed for just one universe. It's compressed a million times. So a storage unit of the size of the universe is going to be needed every million seconds. So a million seconds is about 11.5 days. But we'll give Him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe some tea breaks, the odd lunch hour, and we'll round it up to 12 days. So that's fine, because 12 days is 2 times 6, and we already know that God made the universe in 6 days, so we're giving Him twice as long, and He could very easily make more of them, given that twice as long. Except, don't forget that in those 12 days, He's actually making a million copies of the universe in that time. This is just to, so he's got a record of everything. Again, it's one copy of the whole universe every second for a million seconds. 1 year is approximately 31.5 million seconds. So let's assume that the young earth creationists, Christian creationists, are correct. I know it's a big assumption, but you know, extend your mind that far. Let's assume they're correct and that the universe was made 6,000 years ago, and as some of them believe, Jesus is going to return within the next 50 years. Again, that's what some of them believe. God, therefore, He doesn't actually need to know what happens beyond that point, because time is going to end then, or at least there's not going to be very much for Him to do, because everybody's going to be raptured or killed or whatever happens. Read Revelation. So we've got 6,000 years in the past, 50 years in the future, 6,050 years. Remember, there's 31.5 million seconds a year. That's 190,575 million seconds. But we'll round it up, or round it down, sorry, and we'll call it 190 billion seconds for convenience. So if God knows everything which has happened, is happening, and everything that will happen, he makes copies in whatever form of the entire universe, and every single particle in it, one copy for every second of its existence. That's 190 billion copies of the universe that he needs to make just to have knowledge of the future and the past, you know, to be all-knowing. So in order to retrieve that information when he needs it, these 190 billion copies, they're indexed and sorted for ease of access. Presumably he's got a search engine, Google Omniscience, something like that, and God is able to consult these records anytime he wants, because he's good like that. He made the rules, he knows the future. All the future is within his grasp. Is God really all-knowing? Does it sound likely that God has some giant hard drive somewhere with 190 billion copies of the universe on it? It's going to be running some mega shit operating system to keep up with it as well. He's not going to be running Windows, that's for certain. Is the scale of this huge records facility even possible? Where's he going to put it, for a start? Obviously, if he's omnipotent, all-powerful, he can do it, which is fair enough. Can't argue with omnipotence. But you see, this is not the full scope of the problem. It's escalating if you look at it a bit more carefully. A second is actually a man-made unit of time. It's quite a lot. If you break it down, it's quite a long unit of time, because you can measure something right down to nanoseconds, or even below that, but we'll go for nanoseconds. A nanosecond, that's a billionth of a second. And down at the atomic level, plenty of things can happen in a nanosecond. Plenty of things. You just think of how many million instructions per second your computer can do. In 1 nanosecond, electricity, which travels quite quickly, it still manages to travel 12 inches through a wire in a billionth of a second. This means that God has to know what is actually going to happen every nanosecond, not just every second. Again, past, present and future. He needs a copy of everything, but this time it's multiplied by a billion. He needs a billion more copies, a billion times more copies than we previously thought. So 1 billion copies per second, and remember we had 190 billion copies when it was only 1 per second, so multiply it by a billion, we've got 190 billion copies of the universe, just so that God can be all-seeing and all-knowing. And we only arrived at this figure because we assumed a low end of 6,050 years. Science, that's real science we're talking about, not this young earth creationism. Science actually estimates that the universe is 13.7 billion years old, which is 2.25 million times older than the creationist view, times which we said was 6,050 years. So let's multiply that again. Multiply everything that we've got so far by 2.25 million. After that, we find that God needs to have over 400 million billion. That's a number 4 with 26 zeros after it. That's how many copies of the universe God would need just to know the past, the present and the future of all things. That's a big number. Remember, that's copies of the universe. Think how big the universe is. There might be 100 billion stars in our galaxy. That's just one galaxy, the Milky Way. Multiply that, again this is where the estimate comes out, by just a ballpark 100 billion galaxies, say. in the universe. And again, that's just working out how many stars God has got to monitor. And stars are quite big things. He's got to monitor every single subatomic particle of the whole universe for billions of years. You know, and there's a lot of particles in a star, more than 2 or 3. So the number of particles in 10,000 billion stars needs a lot of monitoring, a lot of recording. You know, God's going to be very busy. You think he's going to have time to read your thoughts and wonder if you've been good or bad? This is getting ridiculous. This is the scale of omniscience, sorry. They're just the two things, omnipotence and omniscience, they're just becoming meaningless. God has turned into the biggest and busiest public records clerk ever. He's just going to be filing things away for the rest of eternity, just so that he can be all-knowing. God is not all-knowing. Even if God existed, he wouldn't be all-knowing. And if he isn't all-knowing, then he isn't all-powerful. And if he isn't all-powerful, what is he? He's not God.
Isn't that illegal?
Censor your kids' ideas. Censor your child's inspiration. Censor all that. Expect a really heavy return spring, because you know what? That kid's going to turn her on you, and you're never, ever going to have a part of his life again.
Casting off the chains of the world.
But enough about me.